Hey, everybody. Uh, Welcome. Glad y'all could come in. Uh, Give a shout out to some of the guys that were in here early. P City. Uh, Got Sogo, Nick,
P City,
Dan's
Sogo,
Creation.
Dan's,
Yep. Avid Fisherman.
Avid.
351 Cleveland. I'm going to go ahead and share this out and share it on Facebook. I know we got Chunky Live and Has Live and a bunch of other stuff going on. And that'll kind of give us a chance to get some people. But Tim, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Uh, it's always a pleasure to have you. Uh, we all kind of refer to you as the professor. You've got a lot of knowledge, and you're gracious enough to share it with us. And we absorb it. We're like sponges. Can't get enough of it. And
David,
I really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm just like anybody else, except for I had the time and the inclination and the fortitude and all that crazy stuff to be a nut about catfishing since I was little. And so I kind of ran my life so that I could chase big fish and figure this stuff out. You and I were just talking off screen about I wish I had time back that I used to do some things that just weren't smart. I mean,
Yeah.
they just weren't because there wasn't anybody to teach me. And if I could go back in time and visit those areas and get close enough to my boat where I could talk to myself, I'd say, look, dummy, you're in the wrong spot. You need to fish the current, the cover, the depth. You need to do this. And I wasn't doing any of that. And, I fished a lot of gar water, caught a lot of drum. I'd catch the occasional catfish when I first started, when I was 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. Even when I had my first boat, I would look at areas and think, wow, I want to stay out of the wind. I like this cove. And I don't want to fish too close to this wood cover, and I had to throw every one of my preconceived notions out the door. And over the years, I have corrected myself many, many times.
Like we got J Dog in, Tim Molina, Hillbilly Jim, catfishing. Hey, Roger with Muskrat Adventures.
Roger.
Yeah. Roger has got a kids tournament and stuff coming up.
Nice.
And they've been talking about the Fishing for Freedom tournaments. Yep. So, I really like to get that information out there.
The worst way to do that, but I am so busy. I talked with my scheduler, which is my wife, and there's absolutely no way I'm going to be able to do that. But I would have loved to. Maybe next year I'll have my life straightened around so I can do a lot of the things that I want to do.
Yep. Looks like Ace Catfishing come in, Christopher Comer, Polar Bear, Dale Hayslip. Hey, guys, welcome, everyone. There's a lot of great tournaments out there, and I have a soft spot for all the veterans, the Patriot tournaments, stuff like that.
Me too.
Those guys gave so much for our freedoms, and it's great to see people give back, and it really means a lot. See, LG Bass made it. Hey, LG.
LG.
But yeah, guys, I don't know if Roger's a mod in here or not, but if he could post some of the links to his tournaments and fishing for freedom, I would appreciate that. It's great that they do this stuff, and the more knowledge we can get out there and spread about this, the better off it is. Last I heard, I think he said they needed another 25 boats to come to Fishing for Freedom. So I appreciate that. All right, he is a mod.
Well, as long as Roger's in here, we should critique his live fishing this morning.
Be my guest.
No, it's not really a critique. The first things first. I wrote a little thing in there, and I said you got to have a lot of cojones to do a live show on a river you've not fished very much and fish for flatheads. So, I mean, first of all, my hat's off to him there. Second of all, you know, flatheads don't bite every day. You know, anybody that chases flatheads much knows that. And, you know, you could go to the river where you've whooped up on the flatheads in spot A, B, C, D, E, F, and G for 3 weeks. And then that one day, you can't get a single one of them to bite. Or if you do, they're little. So
Yeah.
we get that out of the way. The second thing is, if you're not used to the style of river that it is, and I guess that just by looking at it, like I told Roger on the thing, I couldn't tell just by, you know, watching through the phone exactly what that river was, but it looked very much like a tiny Tennessee river. Water was fairly clear, it was fairly slow, and it was fairly deep. Now, Roger mentioned that it was fairly shallow, but for rivers that narrow, 20 to 25-foot average depth with 40-foot holes is actually fairly deep. So, and I was telling you off screen, you know, beginning of the chat, that there's a lot of rivers twice that wide, half that deep, and they don't have the cover and they don't have the structure, which cover meaning, and I watch a lot of lives, and I'm not hacking on anybody, but just to remind everybody, just so we're all talking on the same page. Cover is things in the water, such as boulders, rocks, sticks, you know, fences, old cars, sunken ships. That's cover. And then structure is the layout of the river. That's the bottom. So whether it's clay, whether it's silt, whether it's just a bowl, or whether it's got hard drops and rock ledges, that is the structure. So structure of the river, cover meaning objects in the water. That way everybody knows what we're all talking about. So I think that Roger found flathead habitat, and I think that a fella might have to fish that 2 or 3 times to figure that out. And I'm a perfect example of that. Like when I go to a new stretch, I may get the right situation in my head. I may figure it out and bust up on some really big flatheads or some numbers or whatever. But sometimes I'll fish a spot and it won't occur to me till my second time or my third time of really having the time to throw my stuff around and go, oh, that's how that is. It wasn't like I thought, but it was close, you know, and I was just off a little bit. And I'll tell you how I know that. Well, there's several examples. Wing dikes, especially. You have a wing dike that's 100 yards long. There might only be 10 feet wide or 15 feet wide or 20 yards wide that holds flatheads at all. And you got to pinpoint it right on that spot. And so how many times does it take to find the right wing dike, fish it effectively, and know exactly where those flatheads are laying, because you can't mark them. So it's all a learning experience. And it's almost like learning in Braille, because you can't see it. You can't, but you know, time and experience on the water is going to get you close, but it's not going to get you exactly perfect unless it's something easy like pre-spawn and you know they're hanging out in 4 foot of water. There's a big root ball with 3 foot of it sticking out and there's current busting around it like that. Well, I know exactly where they're at. I just can't tell you during the height of the pre-spawn whether it's a 40-pounder or a 4-pounder going to be there. I have my guesses, but sometimes it'll fool you either way. You think, you know, I'm fishing right. I'm going to go fish this just because it's sticking out, and it looks like a normal 10 to 20 pound spot, but yet there's a 48 sitting there for some dumb reason. But with flatheads, I was talking with Rob too, because I wrote this article about a pattern that I do on what I like to call a nondescript river. That means that there's not that much current. There's not that much movement to the river, you know, as far as left and right. There's not as much river hole run scenario like that. Riffle hole run scenario lets me target in on the flatheads because of current and direct drops. That's when you're going along and it's, 10 feet, and then all of a sudden the bottom drops like that. Everybody calls those holes, but holes, a lot of times people just kind of dribble in and it just gets deep. But I'm talking about those ones that are real pronounced. Boom, and then they drop off straight in line with the current. So those flatheads sit down here and position. Those are your easy ones. When you see those, you go, yep, there's flatheads here, because that's what they like. But when you're talking about basin holes where maybe, maybe it goes from 20 foot of water or 15 foot of water and just sort of dribbles into 40 feet of water over 100 yards, well, they can be anywhere. So when you have that situation, I do this thing where I'll go to the head of it. I'll envision in the beginning a fairly loose grid pattern, like maybe a 12 foot by 12 foot grid pattern. And I'm going to take my first 6 rods and I'm going to cover grid A, B, C, D, E, and F. I'm going to cover that for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to reel them in, and I'm going to go to secondary grid, and I'm going to keep cover so that I've got baits in a 10 to 12 foot zone for 5 minutes apiece. And I'm going to keep leapfrogging. And then once I contact the fish, say I get lucky enough to hit one because I'm basically blind, then I'll go, okay, so this grid side on the current seam is doing better than over here. But sometimes on my sides, I got to throw sideways and let that bait bump down river like this till it catches a hump or anything, maybe a stick or a log, because they could be kind of laying out in no man's land, especially when current's low in rivers like Roger was fishing, and just sitting on a stick or a rock or a stump or a log or a brick. It doesn't really matter. I mean, they'll nose right up to a brick. You got brick like this. They'll sit with their chins on it, And so when little bait fish are coming by, boom. And so they do the same thing on lips of direct drops, whether they're big or whether they're small. They do all kinds of things that I did never imagine that they would do. But I found out over the years that they'll do it. Little bridge abutments like you've got a bridge. So here it is coming down into the water. Here's the top of the bridge. It's coming down into the water. It's just angled just slightly enough. It creates just enough of a current break, but yet this abutment here has a little bump out and it goes down, and then there's a crevice, a crease right along where the bottom meets with it. Sometimes you got to get your bait right in there, because if you're not on it, you're off of it, and they're not willing to come to you. It's pretty crazy stuff. I've sat in a spot 20 minutes with baits effectively, what I thought in my mind, effectively placed, take one out and go and start feeling and probing around, and it drops down real nice, and then boom, like right off the bat, because I got it close enough to its face. Strike zones are big when they're inactive. Sorry. Yeah. Strike zones are small when they're inactive. Detection zone is big whether they're active or non-active. So 10, 12 feet in front of a flathead, they can tell that there's a live bait there. They might even be able to smell a cut bait. But are they willing to go get it? You and I were talking about that a lot of times you can start out in front of the cover and you don't contact the fish. You could be 4 or 5 feet in front of, say, a log jam, like the leading front face that's attached to the bank. And there's only 6 foot of water under it at the bank. There's 10 foot of water just off the bank, and there's 12 foot of water where the water swirls around and, starts going. So sometimes you can sit there for 20, 30, 40 minutes to an hour with your baits. Placed strategically in front. They know it's there, but you won't get bit until you go in after them. You don't have to throw it into the logs, but just close enough, just that far. And then sometimes you let it hit, and then you got to let your spool out and let it go up underneath, because most of the time there's floats bashing into it. So it looks like a little porch. So the rest of my hand is the logs and the sticks that are connected to the ground. And then these are kind of sticking out. So when you plunk your bait in, you got to let it go underneath like that. And I'll tell you, that has saved my bacon a bunch of times while flathead fishing. A bunch of times. And I don't like to do it because you risk all your stuff. Your stuff. If you go in directly after them, you're going to hang up more than necessary. And sometimes they're not in that wood if they're active enough. So you got that log jam again. And so this is where they're normally at. The current's coming this way. You got that little overhead cover creating shade. And then underneath here, sometimes they're out front of it because there's usually a lip on the bottom. So it comes along, drops down just a little bit because that current's hitting where those logs are touching the bottom. So it'll scour out a little hole there, and they'll sit there. And sometimes they're out front, sometimes they're up on the lip. And I know this because I'll set up and I'll throw my baits out to the wood, but I'll drop one almost straight down to that from that lip. So I'll put my back of my boat right where that bottom goes from, say, 8, 9, 10, 11 feet, and then boop, goes into 14, 15, and I'll catch them right on that lip sometimes. So sometimes instead of in that cover, I have to pull back and fish like that. So I've learned to stay away from it a little bit first, go in sort of in a military fashion and just sort of plunk baits 3, 4, 5, 6 feet away from it. And then if I don't get any action there, then I'll take 1 or 2 of those baits and I'll leap it in closer to that wood. And if I get paid off there, then I'll take my other ones and go. And I mean, small log jams that are off the bank, only 2 foot of water underneath them in the first 4 feet, and then 6 foot of water coming out for maybe 15 feet wide. I've caught as many as 10 flatheads on something like that. And if I wouldn't have gotten close to it, and I mean, you're almost in danger of not being able to anchor there because the current is so slack. Sometimes I have to come into it a little bit sideways. I got to stay out in the current, and I got to throw a little bit sideways in towards that bank to get it to sweep up underneath there, so I'll contact flatheads.
Yeah. I see J&S Outdoors made it in, Mad Catter, Dave Gachar, Becca the Mud Tramp. Welcome, everybody.
Becca.
Glad you popped in. Yep. Hadn't seen Becca in a while. It's good to see her here. Polar Bear's in here. I think I got everybody. Sorry if I missed anybody. Mario Sanchez. A lot of the time, too, Tim, people don't understand it has a lot to do with timing. Those live in Minnesota's welcome. Those big flatheads, they may eat once every 3 to 4 days.
Yep.
Go and fish a spot one time and say there's just no fish there, because if they're not feeding, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to force them to bite. They're especially flatheads, they can be very, very finicky fish.
Yep.
So that's what people's got to remember too, is just because they're not there at that time does not mean they're not there, period.
My number's 5. So when I'm forming a new milk run, like let's just say I want to, I normally fish the Rock Island pool, which is pool 16. If I want to go and figure out 15, it's going to take me 5 times of fishing what I think looks like great flathead habitat. I'm going to have to fish it in the pre-spawn. I'm going to have to fish it in the post-spawn. That's the 2 separations right there. I'm also going to have to fish it at night. I'm going to have to fish it in the morning, and I'm going to have to fish it at midday. So usually I'll visit a spot at least 5 times in varying circumstances. I'll definitely visit it when I know the bite is on. So like if I've already got a spot that I know holds flatheads all the time, maybe it's a massive log pile and the current comes into it just right and the bottom sweeps just right and it creates shade and doing all this stuff, and I go in there and pop some good flatheads like 3 out of the 5 times that I go, or 4 out of the 5 times, or 5 out of the 5 times, I'll still go fish that other one because there is some cover that holds small flatheads and no big ones, like all the time. So even if I catch flatheads on it, I will have to say, no, I'm only going to use that if I absolutely have to put some fish into the boat. If I absolutely have to, I might go visit what I call the Dinkersville, because I'm going to leave it up to my customers or whoever I'm fishing with. I would say, Sean, bite's really tough on these big fish on the main channel. You want to go to Dinkersville and put some fish in the boat? Sometimes he says no. Sometimes he says yes. Let's go. Let's go put some of them teeners and 20s and 30s in the boat instead of putting the time in for the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And sometimes I want to do that in the middle of the day. It's hotter than Hades out. And so I'll go into a secondary channel that's really big with some decent current and smaller wood cover that just doesn't hold an amount of flatheads over 30 pounds. Just traditionally, it doesn't, unless the water's been high for about 2.5 weeks, which pulls them off the main river into that secondary channel. Yeah.
Notice Lynn come in.
What's that?
Said I noticed Lynn come in, Catfish Fever and Surf Fans Catfishing. Welcome, guys.
What up, Lynn?
Okay.
So remember that I talk about current a lot. Okay.
Yes.
There's current velocity that's too low if there's other current velocities that are available. Okay, so we're not talking lakes. Lakes are usually, it's basically all the same current. Okay, but if you got a river like the Mississippi, you got a river like the Tennessee, the Kentucky, the Catawba, all these different rivers that have all kinds of different topographies. If you're too slow a current, you're not on flatheads. If you're in too fast a current, you're not on flatheads. It's just that, it's that porridge effect, you know, too hot, too cold, just right. And the top current may be too fast for flatheads, but the bottom current's just right. Because if you get a dip in that bottom like I'm talking about, it'll be pressure. Oh, we're in flathead current. And the more videos I do, the more people are going to notice, because I say it all the time. Especially, you know, if I'm with Sean or if I'm with whatever, I don't usually do it when I'm by myself. But, you know, you go, okay, it looks like too much current, but that bottom content is going to either have a reverse flow or it's going to gently scoot by. So you've got that top swath that moves fast this way and that bottom swath that either moves this way at a nice good crawl or even this way. And sometimes in a circular fashion, like an eddy, or then maybe a turnover like this, or maybe a turnover backwards. And I find that some of my biggest flatheads ever have come on reverse current holes. And that is something that is completely alien to most people. And it's alien to most people because they don't have the time that I used to. And I honestly, if the only time I had to learn all this was right now, I'd never learn what I know. I had to learn it back when I had the luxury of the time, which I don't now.
Yeah. I see Ace made it in, and Creole. How's it going, Creole?
I'm going to have to switch my chair around because it started raining again.
Did it?
Oh, yeah.
That's a big thing, too, with the current too slow and current too fast. That's great knowledge to have, and the current you're looking for, because you can eliminate a lot of water and only start fishing productive water.
You can eliminate almost all the water because really flatheads, and it doesn't really matter what river you're in, unless it's a very slow river. Flatheads in a fast river, they only like about 10 or 15% of the water. And that's one of the reasons why I really gravitate towards the Mississippi, because I can eliminate flathead. You know, I can eliminate on almost every pool I go to, from all the way from Minnesota all the way down to probably maybe Kentucky. I can eliminate most of the water as being too fast for flatheads. They like that fringe area, and there's some habitats that have flatheads and blues cohabitating, but most of the time not.
See, Brandon from Catfishing Dreams made it in. So,
good.
Elaborate a little bit more on that current, Tim. You say too fast a current and too slow a current. What do you consider to be too fast of a current, and what do you consider to be too slow of a current? Is there a set amount, or does it depend on the river you're in?
It does depend on the river you're in a little bit, and it also depends on the but I don't want to make it too complicated. Let me just say it's about between a mile, well, maybe 3/4 of a mile to 1.5 miles, somewhere around there. They will, and that kind of current needs to be next to slower water than that, and needs to be next to faster water than that. It's really kind of interesting, and most of the time it's going to be a 1/2 mile to 3/4 of a mile to 1 mile an hour under the water, but it's going to be faster than that on the surface in a river. unless you're fishing a block. If you're fishing a let's just say that the water kind of gets shoved into, say, a rise, and then it slows down and there's a keeper, and then all of a sudden on the backside it just sort of goes in and then it comes around the end like on a tip of a wing dike or a big log jam that's on the bottom, or even like large concrete obelisk type buildings, and especially sunken ships. So sunken ships, you're going to have a lot of different kinds of current. You just got to figure out what the flathead current is. And they like to be able to run the lip of the channel. So let's say there's a almost a straight down ledge, and then the bottom meets. They love to run that. And if you can get your baits onto that somehow, you just up your odds of landing flatheads if it's associated with some sort of cover, has the right current, and then has a channel lip that's fairly defined. You just increase your odds of catching a flathead 100-fold, an absolute 100-fold. I have spots that are 5-minute spots. I can go from the boat launch, set on my spot, set up, and if the bite's decent at all, have a 30 to 40 pounder in the boat within the first 15 minutes. That doesn't happen all the time, but it's happened to me enough that I can pick those spots out. But if I'm slightly off with my bait placement, I just won't be in the strike zone. And it'll take more time, or they just simply won't go to it. And it ends up taking me longer, and I got to really kind of poke around and move stuff around to where I can contact those fish.
Yeah. Justin's Fishing Pettis made it in, and LG Bass. I noticed something you said earlier today. We were watching Roger Muskrat Adventures, and the current in that river that he was in today was such a slow current.
Yep.
It actually makes it harder to locate the flathead because they can literally stay in that current anywhere in that river.
That's right.
It makes it hard.
Once all the current is flathead current, then it's acceptable to be anywhere. And when the current drops on the Mississippi River, I've actually been at the boat launch, looked at the current, told my customers, I said, this ain't gonna get it. It wasn't supposed to be this low. We got to go to the pool down or the pool up. Which one do you want to go to? Because we're in for a long day, because all of a sudden those flatheads can just spread out. And they've actually picked 2 fish on that. And then I have to go to those hardline military operation type patterns where I'm gridding things and I'm throwing things sideways and I'm moving baits constantly, and I'm anchoring 40 to 50 times, focusing on the main channel ditch, focusing on the big sand dunes, focusing on bridge abutments, focusing on stuff with points of current, and then focusing on barges that are parked near the shore with current going into it enough to where it increases the current underneath the barges. That's the only way I'm going to come up with my 10 fish a day when that water drops down. There's a lot of spots that are normally good, but when the water goes down, the fish may be there, but they're not eating.
That's one thing I noticed too by watching a lot of the live streams and the guys fishing on these rivers. Current has a lot to do with it. You'll see guys when they get there, they've got the gates open, they're letting water out, and the bite will be on. And you can tell as soon as they shut them gates off and shut that down, the bite is gone. It just.
Yep, it is done.
Hey, Tim Molina, welcome.
Now, when that happens, when they shut that down, since I'm in a boat, and it's happened to me on the Mississippi, when I got 3 days to go, that's when I took up tight to those dams, because the rest of the river is slack. It's terrible. I mean, it's still got current, but it's half the current it was. So when you see me tuck up tight to those dams and fish as hard tight as I can, it's usually low water. When it's higher water, I kind of stay away from them, because those fish, especially if it bumps right up, those huge fish are not pushed up to those dams. They're downriver. they're in their comfort zones. They're in, tips and wing dikes in the main channel. They're, around those big, Avid knows what I'm talking about. Those big granaries and the grain legs where it breaks a little bit of current, and the big gigantic tubes where they tie barges off to. But when the current's down, there's not a flathead one besides dinks in those spots. I have to switch my thinking around to follow that current because I'm hard-headed. I have to see. I've always had to see. I mean, you guys will see on my last video, the current was dropped in the Scary River, but yet I still wanted to see whether these fish were in that shallow, fast water or not. Unfortunately, I was blocked to be able to get to the deep holes. So my deepest water I had was 7 foot, but most of them were filtered down into the deeper water. And you guys all see that.
Yeah. And that makes it hard too, because especially me being a bank fisherman, I may know where the fish are at, what depth of water they're at, but I may not always be able to get to it. And to me, there's nothing more frustrating than you know where you need to be, you know where the fish are at, and you just can't get there. It works that way sometimes.
It does.
It's fishing. If it was easy, everybody would do it. A lot of people get out there and they stumble on to a fish blindly. They'll be trying something and just doing something, and they'll look in to catch a big fish.
Sure.
But you want to do it consistently, and you want to consistently perform. You need to gather as much data and information and start applying it. Don't just say, man, I caught fish. When you're catching fish, ask yourself, okay, what am I doing different? Why are the fish here like they are now? What are the weather conditions? What's the water temp? What depth? Before I go fishing, before I leave the house, when I make my mind to go fish a spot, I've already thought it out in my mind, and I know why I'm fishing that spot. Why do I think the fish are going to be there? And that's why I go. Don't just go blindly.
I agree 100%. I mean, but let's think about this too. There's a lot of people out there that they enjoy fishing. They want to catch bigger fish, but they don't have that kind of time and money and inclination and effort and all that stuff to put into that. Hopefully they can listen to crazy psychos like you and me and be closer to the big fish on their weekend jaunts or, when they have time. Because I'm telling you, it's when you don't know what's going on with catfish, it's really rough, and especially if you're stuck to the bank. And luckily these days there is Google Earth, there is things like that, because it was really difficult. I mean, I spent a day and a half down by St. Louis trying to find bank spots before I owned a boat. And I actually ended up trespassing once. I caught fish, but I walked out on the end of a wing dike and set up, 150 yards from shore. And then I got chased off of it. I don't know how a landowner below Alton figured out I was on the river, but they did. Maybe it was my car, my truck. But I mean, I spent 6 days at the mouth of the Missouri River trying to fish those wing dikes that are there, and I didn't know because there was no navionics, or I just wasn't fishing the deep water. I was fishing the wrong side, but it was the only spot I had access to. It was slower. The wing dikes were filled in, and since I've seen it in the boat, I know exactly why I wouldn't fish there, but I didn't know any better. And man, I mean, 6 days, I mean, I don't care if I was 20, or 18 or 19 years old. That's a lot of time to invest in a spot. I might as well have been fishing a mud puddle.
But you learn from it. It taught you something. I hear people a lot, especially on their live streams. They go out and they get skunked, or they're just not catching fish, and they get down on themselves and they're like, guys, I'm sorry. They apologizing. Don't be sorry. Learn from your trip. Learn from your experience. Why were the fish not there? That's the question you should be asking is, if you're not catching fish, try and figure out why. There is always an equation. Something is going on.
And in this day of information, there's enough people sharing information that it's a lot easier. It's not easy for everybody, but it's a lot easier because I'm telling you, there was nobody sharing information back, in the day. I've said that a
I
hundred
know.
times, but there just wasn't. They'd tell you the wrong thing than rather help you.
Yep. You'd ask them where'd you catch them, and they'd tell you in the mouth or something like that.
Well, or this backwater slough, or go to this, the grain legs that are way off the main channel, and it's basically carp and gar water they're sending you to, but yet, I mean, and maybe they didn't know back then. Maybe they're just trying to be important to a kid that was interested. I don't know. But the other thing happened. The other thing, that when I'd go to boat ramps and people start talking to me about fish when I was like 23, 24, 25, and I was figuring it out, and I was already catching big fish. I had a nice boat and I did all this stuff, and people would be asking me questions, and I'd be telling them, and they'd be like, you know how people are. They start rolling their eyes a little bit, not at me, but you could tell but get the picture book out. It went from, yeah, right, to, oh my God, I want to fish with you. And so it's just one of those weird information things. I guess if you're too young, you don't know. And now if you're too old, you're nothing but a boomer and you don't know. So I don't know what the deal is.
There's Matt from Want to Be Outdoors. Hey, Matt.
Nice.
The information that's shared out now has come a long way, because there was a time people didn't. And there's so many guys out there that are getting into fishing that want to learn and stuff. I try and share as much as I can to help them, so they don't have to go through the same struggles that I did. Because I learned everything the hard way.
Yeah.
And if I can save somebody that time, kind of like you say, I wished I could get that time back. If I can save somebody else that time, I'm going to do it. Donald Weir, hey. Jay Sprayberry, welcome. And I hear people a lot. They're like, man, I go fishing all the time. I just can't catch nothing. Well, what's the fish population in the bodies of water that you're catching? Stuff like that is important. If you got a 30,000 acre lake and it averages, 2 fish per acre, compared to another 30,000 acre lake that has 500 fish per acre, it's going to make a big difference in whether you're catching fish or not. You got to fish. You got to fish where the fish are. Just because there's water there does not mean there's fish in it.
Okay, so down by St. Louis, I have that same situation. The body of water is still so many gallons, but that blue cap migration, as soon as that water starts to drop in the fall, they start filtering downstream. And so all of a sudden, my population, if it was 100% in August, it's down to 40% by, September. It's down to 20% by December, all that. So I've learned that over the years, and I'll go to certain spots that are have lots of decent fish and a few big fish in August or September, but come October, November, it looks like the surface of the moon, and that's pretty darn consistent.
Roger makes a great point here. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
Yep.
And
I got a good catfishing friend that said that all the time.
Yeah, I used to tell the definition of insanity, if you look it up, it's doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results each time.
Except for with fishing, you can be right doing the same thing, but it's not going to be that many times a year.
Yep.
July 4th, when those flatheads in my territory are up in 3-4 foot of water and the currents kind of went away from it, but yet they're still there because some of them are on eggs. Well, and if somebody goes in there and throws in, a bunch of wood, and all of a sudden they catch 10 flatheads that day, the biggest is 55 pounds, well, they're going to try it in June. and they're going to try it in May. They're going to try it in, August and September when there's no current there. Well, they'll be right again when July rolls around, or that same circumstance rolls around. If it's high water and they're fishing from the dock at the boat ramp and they catch a bunch of flatheads at night in July, well, by August and the current's low and those fish are out, and they wonder why they didn't catch a bunch of flatheads.
Yeah.
And I believe it's because that in catfishing, nobody's taught current. Magazines don't teach it. TV shows don't teach it. It's just now with this YouTube catfish community that I see people paying attention to the current. And, you see people like Creole, and I'm not going to leave anybody out, but a lot of them are paying attention to current. Muskrat's paying attention to current. Kelly's learning about current. Everybody's learning about current. And that is one of the greatest things I've seen in catfishing in 40 years.
Yeah. Creole's got the correct term there at the end of that. Fishing for ghosts.
Fishing
I cannot
for
tell
ghosts.
you. I cannot tell you how many times I see that. Tim, a question I get a lot from different people, and I know you have a lot of experience with it. It's really key in catfishing, and that's bait tanks. Because without bait, you're not fishing. So can you go over and explain some of the stuff you've learned on the bait tanks and stuff, and kind of share with us the do's and don'ts and stuff that'll make it easier for us?
Let's start with the scientific basics. And this is easy science, so don't everybody get nervous. Hot water equals dead fish. Okay, first and foremost. Hot water equals dead fish. Doesn't matter how.
Watch dog in real quick.
If the water's too hot, it doesn't matter what kind of aeration you've got in it. Doesn't matter how clean the water is. If it's too hot, you got dead fish. And certain bait fish die at certain water temperatures, like suckers. Anything over 55, 60 degrees, they don't do very well. Uh-oh.
I'm still here, Tim. Go ahead.
Okay.
I got to let my wife's dog in.
Chubs, minnows, suckers, all of those creek fish, those spring-fed creek fish do not do well in anything over 60 very long. Now, if you're going to catch them in the morning and use them, and, maybe you're only going to have them for 8-10 hours, that might be fine. So to make things cheaper, I started buying those bigger coolers, those Coleman 128 quart coolers. They hold a lot of water. I don't know how many gallons is 128 quarts, but it's quite a bit. All right, so we're not even worried about aeration yet. We are worried about keeping bait fish alive that are cold water fish for 10 hours. So keeping it cool is the key. But too cold, once you hook your baits and you throw them into that warm water, it shocks them. So you got to keep it relatively okay. So if your water temperature is 75 degrees and you're fishing, you can have 60, you can even have 55 with bluegills. You can even have that with suckers. But shad is a little bit different story. Shad actually, and let me get this straight, shad go from cold water to warm water very well. They don't go from warm water to cold water very well at all. They get shocked. So let me back up here a little bit. If you're keeping bluegills are better in colder water, but they can live pretty decently in 75 degrees. You just have to aerate it fairly heavily, and you have to do the biggest thing for bait fish, and I do it all the time. It's purging bait fish. If people are catching their bait right before they fish, they're putting them into a container, it doesn't matter how well it's aerated. They just won't live very long if you don't do what's called purging. And once you stress a bait fish out, whether it's a sucker, a bluegill, a carp, anything, first of all, they have a lot of waste. So you caught them from the river, you put them in, let's just say a 5-gallon bucket full of water. Shad immediately puke. Nobody knows this, but they do. They puke. They put all kinds of acid from their stomach into that water, which burns up their gills and basically kills them off. Everybody wonders why shad die in almost anything you put in them if you take them from the net and into the thing. So to keep shad alive, even big shad, I can keep big shad alive for 14 hours in a square cooler. Now, how do I do that? I will use river water, but I have two containers. I have one like a Coleman cooler that's about half the size of my big one. So I first dump about 10, and you can't overcrowd it. Let's just say we're going to deal with 10 shad in the beginning. So I'm going to put them in there, and I'm going to wait approximately 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, but I'm going to watch them pretty good. I'm going to look at them. As soon as they start kind of keeling over a little bit, I hand grab them. You can't net them because all that acid and all the slime and all the crud will get on your net and you'll transfer it into your regular water. So I'll hand grab them out and put them in one by one, like this. Now what I have is I've got river water, and I've also got a certain amount of well water. I'll put about 20% well water, which cleans that up just a little bit. And I'm a little bit picky on shad. Shad's the most difficult to keep alive besides moon eye and skipjack. They're just as equally tough. So the one thing about shad is that you need a little bit of rock salt. And I use about 1 cup for 128 quarts. But you can't just dump it in with the shad. You got to dump it in first, make sure it's all kind of mixed and whatever. Now the third key, so we've purged the shad, we've caught the shad, we've purged the shad, we've hand moved them into my fairly cool aquarium with 80% river water, 20% well water or tap water that's been treated. And it's also got 1 cup of salt in there. And the other thing is, a lot of people try to use those recirculators, okay? The spray bars. Spray bars are horrible on shad. I've tried to use them for years. The scales that come off gets caught. The spray itself washes off their slime coat on those shad. That slime coat. Once that slime coat's gone, they start excreting proteins, which is the foam that builds up in your bait tank. So it's spraying like this. It's hitting those shad and it's wiping off the slime coat. So what I did is I moved to a power inverter, which they don't cost that much anymore. They used to be. When I bought my first one, they were damn expensive. They were $100 for one that you can buy for $30 now. But it's basically plumbed right into my regular system. And then I use an aquarium pump right from Walmart. It's about that big. It's about $15. I use the air hose, drill a hole through the cooler, and use one of those spray bar, not a spray bar, it's a bubble bar about 12 inches long, and it just sits on the bottom. Now, I'll tie a lead to it, but I've gotten into taking steel bars, which you can also buy at like Menards. They're about 1/4 inch thick, and I just glue them to the bottom of it so it never gets knocked over. They don't jostle it around because they're kind of lightweight. But since I started doing that, I can keep bluegill, suckers, shad, carp, white bass, rock bass, green sunfish. I can keep a certain amount of moon eye alive. I can keep a certain amount of skipjack alive since I've been doing that program. And it's not all that expensive. I mean, I think you can get like those 128 quart coolers. I think I paid $70, $65, $70 if you can get them on sale. Sometimes they're, more than that. But since the Yetis came out, the Coleman's got cheaper. So I've got an old junk one that I purge them. So, and this is important too. So if you put river water in your smaller cooler so that you purge your fish and put them in the tank, you got to pour that water out before you get your next set, because the acid will double build up on them and it'll burn their gills and they're done. So that's one thing about shad. I used to be able to bring shad home to my 1,000-gallon tank and keep them alive all winter. Now it's difficult in the summer because if shad get too hot, they don't do very well. But in the winter, I could put a thermostat heater on that so that when it got below 0, it would keep it hovered at about 45. Now, like Peace City, I've also got another one for long term. I took an old freezer, a small one, and I lined it with a tarp, believe it or not. and I filled it full of water. I got a little pond pump that pumps it into a biological filter that I made. I'm not going to get too far in depth with that because you can look that stuff up on YouTube if you want to do it. So it pumps it into there and then pumps it back in. So the floss takes out all of the stuff, but I also purge those fish. I'll put them in a regular cooler even overnight and change the water on those several times before I put them in that tank, because you get 1 or 2 die on you, then you got problems, because now all of a sudden you've changed the pH. You've got a lot of protein problems. You've got a lot of ammonia in the water and all that. So as long as, like, I can get red horse suckers that are 20 inches long, and I'll go get 15 or 20 of them. But if I put them straight into that tank and expect that filter to do it, I got problems. Even if I keep that water temperature at 51 degrees, I still need to purge them, because they'll overload that system, because there's so many in a small volume of water. Now, I can throw them in my 1,000-gallon tank with a 300, but it's so expensive to run because it runs on a regular, like a big pool filter. I mean, the motor's that big. I mean, it's expensive to run, and if I'm not guiding every day, and I don't need to keep 500 bluegills anymore. I used to have to literally take one day and go catch 500 bluegills, bring them home, and put them in that tank, because there was no time for me, because I'd have consecutive trip day after day after day after day, and then just have 1 or 2 days off a month. So I would keep 500 bluegills. I'd stash the things in Floetrol buckets with a rock in it. I'd bring 300 to the river and stash them on root balls, tie a little bitty line and just sink them in the river. So I'd have enough baits when I needed bluegills. Now, a lot of times I could just go net shad, or I could net moon eye or whatever, and that was working. But when I needed good hardy live bluegills to supplement that, it was a lot of work. So I really had to figure all that stuff out.
Well, see, and that's like me. A lot of the bait shops around here, even if you wanted to go buy bait, they're not open at night. So
Right.
You've got to have a way to store your bait, because, you don't want to have to go out every trip and go catch bluegill and shad before you go out. Fresh bait is key, and you can't always get on the fish. You don't want to waste 3 to 4 hours of prime fishing time catching bait. If you can get your bait and keep it alive in one of them bait tanks, it's there as you need it, and it makes a tremendous difference. I know a lot of guys don't really think there's a lot of difference between fresh bait and frozen bait. And to me, it makes a difference. I like fresh bait. I don't like freezing it. For me to use frozen bait, that means I had no other choice. I didn't get any live.
Right.
I could not buy no bait. I just could not find nothing.
And David, there's some people that don't have the luxury that people like you and I do. And I'm not feeling sorry for anybody, but there are people that they don't have much bait opportunity where they live. They have to go 40, 50, 60 miles to go get bait. And so frozen bait is their best option, without, spending a whole bunch of money and time and stuff that they don't have. So, I mean, if you only have time to fish on a Saturday and you need to have bait, frozen bait is going to be your key. I mean, I knew a guy that lived in Indiana. He'd drive 30 miles to go to a lake and net shad, and it was the opposite way. So it cost him 60 miles to go to his fishing destination. And he was willing to do that. But, a lot of people don't have that luxury.
Yeah. And, a lot of lakes and stuff that do have shad population and stuff in, a lot of them, they won't allow you to use cast nets. You can't cast your bait there. So, it makes it hard for people to get a hold of it. I think that's why
it's horrible to fish in for flatheads. Wisconsin's absolutely horrible. You can't use bluegills. You can't use this. You can only use bullheads and suckers. You're not allowed to net shad. You're not allowed to use it, even have a cast net on your boat. So you're stuck at the mercy of buying suckers from the bait shop. And they can cost as much as $3 or $4 a piece. So I don't do it very much. There is a bait shop that Hook Catfish told me about that sells them for a lot cheaper than that. So when we go, that's what we're going to do. But holy moly.
Yeah. I see the Wandering Fisherman and your boy Troy made it in.
Troy.
Guys, bait will make you or break you. That is probably one of the biggest keys to success.
Yep.
And, it can be one of the biggest struggles for a cat fisherman. Because if you fish a lot, look at, for instance, Roger, Muskrat Adventures. He spends a lot of time on the water fishing. So them guys go through a lot of bait.
Yep.
If they cannot get bait, you don't get to fish. So,
my next video,
I really want to get that out there and get that information, because bait tanks, they save you a lot of time and a lot of money in the long run.
So David, on my next video that I hope I can upload either tomorrow or the next day, it shows my boat bait tank really well. And I describe that I would have rather had fresh shad than what I brought, but I could not afford to not bring bait because I couldn't find a single shad in that entire Illinois River. And I know where all the spots are. For some reason, when the water's low, we don't have a decent shad population anywhere close to where I fish. I mean, it's terrible. So, although chubs and suckers are still an adequate bait, I would still rather have those little 3-4 inch shad. You snip the head off, snip the tail off, use the body section, use the head with even smaller hooks. We would have caught more fish. We were able to catch quite a few fish, but it's at one time the Illinois River was just rich with shad. I mean, I could have so many shad, one net done, fill a 5-gallon bucket. And now it is so bad that you're hard pressed to find any at certain times of year.
See, I ran into that this year because this year is the first year in a long time all of our lakes actually froze over, and a big shad kill from that.
Yep.
And it made it really hard to get fresh shad at the lake I fished. And you can catch some of the smaller shad, but when I like shad, I like catching the 14 to 16 inch shad. I like big shad. I like big baits.
Yeah.
And it really took a toll on them. Luckily with shad, especially in the lakes we're at, the warm water and stuff, they'll spawn twice a year.
Yep.
So it'll kind of build that population up. But right now, shad are so hard to come by. If you're going to use live bait and stuff, you better go catch you some bluegill or some crappie or something you can use for bait.
All right. I got a question for you.
Okay.
You're a lake guy.
Yes.
And I have seen your lives, and I've seen you talk about it, and I've seen the knowledge that you have on lakes. Why don't you give some of these guys that are, and I can't see who's in chat, but I know there's guys that fish lakes in there because they're always asking, how do I get on fish? How do I make sure, I think Dan's that is probably in there. He does all the metalwork stuff. He's constantly frustrated by the fact that, he'll be fishing in an area and it might be 10 hours before he even gets a bite.
Yeah. That's Dan's Creations and Adventures.
Explain to these guys in your own words, because you say it well, exactly how to kind of turn their stars around on that if they can.
Dan's biggest problem, Dan fishes areas around Oklahoma City. These lakes have been there for years and years. They see a ton of fishing pressure.
Okay.
So you don't have the numbers of fish in those lakes that you do in other lakes. They're not, a lake cannot rely on the fish spawning and reproducing to stock itself. You have to put fish back into it. You've got to have it there. If they're not maintaining and taking care of these lakes, they get fished out.
So in other words, you're saying that he needs to try to, or people in Dan's situation, that are fishing heavily pressured lakes need to try to find a different fishing venue that they can go to. Because if you keep doing the same thing, and I get that, because there's certain rivers that I would go to, such as the Illinois, try to flathead fish. There is not the flathead population on the Illinois River that there is on the Mississippi. I could fish every day on the Illinois River and not catch as many flatheads in a year as I could in 2 days on the Mississippi. And they're basically equally the same distance apart from me. So the Illinois, I'd fish all year for 20 fish. I'll catch 20 fish in a day or 2 on the Mississippi. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, you got to have the numbers, the fish population, the amount of fish per acre in a lake. Do your research. Look at that lake. See how long it's been since they've stocked it. See what kind of fish are coming out of it. You take a minnow, one single minnow, and you put it in a minnow bucket. You can catch that minnow in that minnow bucket a lot easier than you can putting that same minnow in a 28-foot swimming pool that's 4 foot deep. Fish where there are fish.
Looks like my signal's going.
We'll hang in there as long as we can, but you gotta fish
inside.
You gotta fish where there are fish. Dan's situation and stuff, a lot of the fish there are small channel cats and stuff like that, and you don't have great numbers of them. So it's going to take a lot longer and a lot more time to see the productivity and actually catch fish. And even when you catch fish, you don't catch numbers. So, set yourself up for success. Don't set yourself up for failure, because Dan, you hear a lot of the times, he's like, what am I doing wrong? Why isn't this working? And it may not be that he's doing something wrong. He's just in the wrong body of water.
Okay, so let's just say he gets on the bright body of water. For lakes, what is going to be a good strategy so that you can contact better fish with less time?
Okay, know your weather pattern, your time of the year, your season. All right. If it's pre-spawn and they're just starting to get ready to spawn and stuff, when they come out of them wintering holes and they hit that shallow water, look for that shallow water where it's going to warm up faster. The backwater creeks and stuff like that are going to draw fish. If there's a creek that feeds this lake, pay attention to that creek, because even though those fish live in that lake, if it is creek fed, they still have that instinct to run up creek to spawn. And especially if there's water running in from that creek and there's fresh water coming in, get to where the mouth of that creek hits that lake, because those fish will follow that fresh water, and it's their natural instinct to go in that creek and spawn. And it funnels them all and will put a wad of fish in a small area.
Nice.
Nice. That's stuff you look for.
That's the kind of information people really need to hear about lakes. There's one thing I can add, is that when I used to fish lakes and ponds, I would go to the steeper ledges. Okay, so from the topography of the edge of a lake, whether it kind of goes out and it's kind of whatever you throw out, and your angle of your line is not very far down. I'd go to the deeper sections so that I had a ledge to throw off of. So and I would just go around. Say it's not a very big lake, or maybe I'm just tackling into a smaller area of a big lake, and I'm going to the public area, and I throw out and I look and I go, oh, it's only 6-8 feet way out there, but yet I've got 10-12 feet right up next to the bank. And a lot of times I would ledger my live baits out when I was younger, but then I started throwing them right off the ledge, 3 foot from my feet. And Avid asked me the other day if I ever used balloon rigs. Well, we never had any bobbers that would hold a bluegill up, so I've been using balloon rigs since I was like 15 years old. So I'd take a balloon rig, I'd put a little snap swivel on it and tie wear a sliding bead, and I'd put like 15 foot on it, flip it out. Because we didn't have clickers back in those days, and I couldn't just free spool it. Didn't have a clicker, so I just wanted a balloon or like a big float I could watch. And so I started contacting better fish that way, steeper banks, and sometimes even like a weed line on a lake. If you can cast a slip float past the weed line and have the wind blow it right to the weed line, because those big channel cats and stuff, they'll follow those weed lines. They
right on the edge
too, but they'll follow that edge of that weed line, and that increased my contact rate 100 plus. I mean,
well, and another thing in that lake, when you catch that weed edge like that, that's out in the water like that, it attracts the bluegill, and the bluegill are up in them weeds, and then fish will come up in there and they'll cruise that weed edge because they know there's bluegill there. There's free, basically. They got a buffet there.
Well, it's like the ring of death around that island in South Africa, and those big great white sharks. That's where they hang out, and they don't go in that far, but they don't stay out that far. There's just that right zone where little fish are in big danger from bigger fish.
Well, and another thing in lakes too, it does not take a whole lot of change in depth to make a difference.
That's right.
1 to 2 foot of water change in the topography of it makes a difference. Old road beds. I've got this one spot I fish. The fish love to spawn there. It's an old road that used to be there when they built the lake. It's flooded now, but the road's still there. The concrete bridges are still there. And I know them big flatheads like to get up under that concrete bridge.
And the ditches are still there.
Yep, the ditches are
ditches,
still there.
Right?
Yep. People will be out there and they'll fish the same water I am, and they're like, "Why are you catching fish and I'm not catching fish?" Well, you're throwing on top of that road bed. You're sitting up here. I'm throwing down in the ditch on the drop off to the sides of the road, because that's where the fish are traveling. Every once in a while, you'll get lucky and catch one going from one side to the other. But the majority of the fish are going to follow that ditch and follow that edge.
And that's what I was talking about, those bridge abutments too. Flatheads, while they will suspend, they will get up on top of the shoulder of the abutment and sit there. Most of the time, they're along that crease, in here, right in here. And they don't derivate too far to the right or too far to the left. They go right down that, and they'll sit right there. Because as a bait, gosh, this is weird. As a bait fish, say this is the bottom, and here's where the bridge abutment sticks up. There's that little corner. There's only 2 ways of escape for a bait fish now, where if they're sitting out in the open, there's 4 ways. And you can see that in fish tanks. As soon as you feed flatheads, they'll move right over to the corner of that, or they'll sit there all the time. And as little fish get funneled right to them, boom, 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 they just eat it well. They're hanging out in the middle, they're just not so good at it.
Well, and they're very opportunistic. They'll use that current and stuff and get behind the rocks and the trees and stuff, because they're ambush predators.
Sure.
They'll sit there and wait for the food to come to them.
Yep.
That's a lot of people get frustrated, like you were talking earlier, fishing the brush piles and stuff. You know there's fish there, you know there's flathead there, but you can't get them to bite because they're not coming out of that timber or rock or whatever it is. Sometimes you have to work that bait back to them because they do have such an ample food supply. They're not going to run to the corner store to get the same candy bar that's being hand delivered to them.
Not if they don't have it. All right. So, was there any good questions in chat that have been popping up?
I haven't seen any. Guys, if you have any questions, ask them. I know Polar Bear had a question. Can you talk about your leader line and the way you set your rods up?
I can. Let me go get it because I put it on the porch. I'll
Okay.
be back in a minute. So you just go
All
ahead
right.
and talk about something.
Okay. Circle Hook Productions, welcome. Guys, if you have any questions for Tim or me, feel free to ask. So there's an area at one of the lakes I frequent that is shallow, and the bank has a drop-off ledge. You saying I should be spending time hitting that area instead of avoiding it? Yeah, Dan, in the lakes especially, any sharp drop-offs that you got like that, change in the depth and the contour, uh, a lot of the time those ledges like that are where the active fish will stage. So they're great. Uh, I know people see a lot with their fish finders, and they know there's fish there, and they'll waste a lot of time fishing because the fish are not active. You've got to fish for the active fish, and the active feeding fish a lot of the times they'll get up on the edge of that ledge. So yeah, if you do have a shallow water around the bank and then it drops off steep, those are great spots, Dan, because the fish have access to deep water and they have access to the shallow water all in one habitat. That fish has everything it needs to survive without having to move very far. And a lot of those areas will hold numbers of fish because that's just prime habitat for them. So, yeah, don't avoid uh, banks that have short drop offs and ledges. Uh, a lot of the guys times you will see rock shelves that go out into the water and they just drop off. A lot of the times, right on the edge of that drop off, where it meets the bottom, is where your fish are going to be, and that's you got to have good tackle because they are notorious for getting you hooked on that rock ledge and cutting your line or breaking it off. Okay, let's see. Matt says he asked a question up in chat. Matt, can you re-ask your question? Want to be outdoors? I will get it up here.
All right, real quick, while we're waiting on that, I'll answer Polar Bear's question about what I do with leaders.
Okay.
All right. So this happens to be a Blue Cat setup. I would never use this stiff of a rod for flatheads, but I would say this is a tow truck rod in heavy action. It's like it's a 7-footer. The longer the rod, the more leverage the fish has on you. Shorter the rod, the less leverage a fish has on you. But if you're going to be in a boat, you can afford to have a shorter rod than you have when you're on the shore because you need to be able to reach out and touch stuff. So if I'm on shore, which I think Polar Bear is, I watched a little bit of his stuff. Longer rods are more important for a shore angler than they are a boat angler. Even though I enjoy long rods no matter what, because sometimes I like to sling those baits out there. So the majority of my rigs are not very fancy. They're basically your line and I've been using sinker sliders quite a bit because I change up weights a lot. And you and I were talking about this, that I might start in 20 foot of water for flatheads or less with slow current. And then I'll switch over to blues when I'm down in Blue Cat country. So then I've got to bring out different rods and, possibly use the same rods, only downsize my weight. So instead of retying everything, I can basically just unsnap this, take this 12 ounce off, put a 6 ounce on or a 3 ounce on. And this happens to be a 10 dot for blues and big, basically big donkey baits. And so then I can just unsnap this, reach over to my pool noodle that's attached to my boat, right underneath the gunnel. I can put this one away like this, and I can grab a 7-aught, or I can grab an 8-aught, or I can grab a 5-aught. That's why I do that like that. But this is basically your standard rig. I've got 80-pound monofilament, big game, which I keep on an old Penn 330 GTI that I put in a plastic ammo case and drilled a hole in it. So I leave the clicker on and I can just pull it. And it stays protected from the sun. I just pull it out, snip it off, pull it out, snip it off. So I can go as fast as I can go because I don't have the luxury of being 20 minutes away from big fish. I got to go a long way. So I want to make every second count. And if I ever do a live show, you'll be like, why is he so serious? Why am I constantly throwing rods and baiting up stuff? And, I got my serious face on when I'm out there fishing. But anyway, I use 80-pound test done with a no-knot snell. I don't know if you can see that. I can tie that thing in the dark in, 3 seconds. And I've never had a problem with one. Now, there's other variations that people talk about. This tagline happens to be about maybe 3/4 of an inch long. As long as I pull it tight, I don't have any memory problems with that. A lot of people talk about 80-pound test unraveling. I think it's because they don't pull it hard enough. Like when I tie these, I'll get that thing going, and I'll really put a pull in it. And then when I do the overhand knot, and I don't know if you can see that either. The overhand knot, I pull that pretty hard too. And a lot of times when I'm actually locking this thing down, because it's like half of a shoelace, you're just tying it, in an overhand knot. I'll take the other part of the hook, put it in here, and then I'll take this thing and really pull it so it's tight. And so once I've got this done, I know that I'm going to be able to, I'd land a 150-pound fish on this, as long as I'm not in a barge, as long as I'm not in super rocks. If I'm fairly well in the open, I feel pretty good about 80-pound test. If there's any metal around, or if there's any rocks around, or there's any what else, I'll get out my 150-pound line, which if anybody's seen any of my lives, I've shown them before, but that's 200-pound test right there with some, giant stuff. Now, most of you guys ain't got any need for that, but on the Mississippi with that heavy current, sunken ships that are sometimes metal, sometimes wood, sometimes there's big obelisks down there, sometimes there's old like intakes from power plants that are under the water, big concrete pillars, all kinds of stuff. So the main line is basically going to be up to whatever you are going to come in contact with. This so happens to be 65-pound Power Pro, because I use this for a down rod. And a down rod just means I'm going to hang it over the side of my boat and put it down like Kayak Catfish does.
Yeah.
Only I need 12 ounces of lead and a 65-pound test. Otherwise, it'll just blow behind the boat, and I'll be 60 yards before an 8-ounce even hits the bottom. And I want to be able to, in lower current, effectively put that below the boat, maybe a foot off the bottom, 2 foot off the bottom. And sometimes I'll tie my rig different, but sometimes I'll leave it just like this. Because honestly, with current like that, I don't need a float. I don't need, like the Santee Cooper rig. I don't need any of that stuff. So what I'm talking about is the current. Let's just say this 12 ounces right here. And that's just how fast it is. So this 12 ounces is hanging underneath the boat like this. And there's current down there. This thing is going to be straight out. If you get it's not just going to hang because there's current. I'm a foot off the bottom. So it's out whether it's got a float on it or not. Problem in my situation is if I've got a float on it, it's got more drag. So now all of a sudden I'm not underneath the boat now. Now I'm 2 boat lengths down and not being effective with my rigging. Now, if I'm in slower water like the Ohio and stuff, nothing wrong with a float rig, a Santee Cooper rig. If I'm fishing the James or any of those rivers. And a lot of people talk about the James, and I'm not making fun of these people at all. They go, oh, the current was just Oh, it was incredible. And I fished the James. I fished the James a lot. That is not. A lot of people overuse their 8-ounce sinkers. You know, they're fishing the tidal stretch. It doesn't get that. It doesn't get half of what the Mississippi does in the main channel when it's low. You ask anybody that fishes the Mississippi, and I'm not saying one's better than the other because the James is a wonderful fishery, and it's pleasurable to fish. Actually, Mississippi is rough to fish. It's Mississippi. If you're used to fishing a lake, or you're used to fishing a slow water river like the Tennessee, or the James, or the Chickahominy, or any of those rivers, Mississippi River's like boot camp. There's people that have went there and said, "I'll never go back," because they're very frustrated because you got to learn all your stuff and all your tricks and all your whatever because it's so volatile.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to discourage anybody. I think a lot more people should experience the Mississippi River. For one, if they do good and like it, that's great. But otherwise, they will appreciate their rivers much more.
Yeah. See, Eric Burnside made it in. Welcome, Eric. And there is a big difference between lakes and rivers. Even one river to another, the current and stuff is different. You need to talk to other anglers and learn those waters.
Don't just good anglers though. There's so many that are not good.
Well, and you may have your boat on one body of water, but that does not mean you're prepared to take it out on one of the big rivers or something. There's a lot of things you got to pay attention to and stuff. And asking a few questions might end up saving your life. Don't get so bound down with your ego you're afraid to ask questions or ask help. If I went out to one of these big rivers, there's no way I would put a boat out on that water my first time there because I do not know the rivers well enough. You have to know the rivers, the channels, what dangers to look for. You need experience in that area. Don't be too pig-headed to ask.
But there's not one situation I've seen or been to that has big fish, say like on the Tennessee or the Ohio or any of that stuff that would worry me because I've been in way worse. But there are some dangerous situations. But I think most people can stay away from them on the Tennessee. If it's major flooded, it's going to be like when the Tennessee is like flooded to the point of emergency. That is like it is on the Mississippi all the time.
Yeah.
So I think people need to use their heads, but I think it's generally if you're somewhat intelligent about how to run a river and how to respect a river, I think most of the rivers across the United States aren't that bad. Now, there's one guy in chat that calls himself Snake River Catfisherman or something.
Yeah.
Now the Snake River, that's even worse than the Mississippi. That thing is a canyon river. Like we were talking when I went to South America and we were in canyons, in whitewater canyons, throwing in 170 foot deep of water. That's dangerous. I mean, we hooked 5 fish and we didn't land any of them. They were big, but we were not prepared for that kind of 6-foot fish in that kind of water.
Yeah. And, it makes a difference, too, as far as your gear and stuff. I know people heard you say 200-pound leader line, and they're like 200 pound. But when you add current and you add the metal or the rock, and even your old wood bridges have the bridge timber nails and stuff exposed, when you add all that to it, it makes a big difference. We got a question from Becca. If you don't know the area, how do you know the difference between a good angler and not so good angler?
Their language, Becca. Their language. I can tell a good angler by their language in less than 5 minutes. I couldn't when I was younger. I didn't know. But you can tell if a guy is magazine knowledgeable or he's real hands-on fishing knowledgeable. And then there's that blend in between the two. There's the guys that read, the guys that listen, and then there's the guys that have done it. But also, you also know that if an angler is telling you something completely like wrong, you'll kind of know. And a lot of times they'll out themselves like that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with anglers that don't know much unless you're trying to follow them. It's like the Pied Piper. You can't follow the Pied Piper. You can learn from them if they know more than you, but you can't say that is the end all because if you're going to be good at something, you got to find people that are knowledgeable and maybe more experienced than you are, or you got a tough long road by yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot easier now because we do have these avenues to where you can go and get information. There's a lot more sharing now than there was before, as we talked about earlier. So, you can kind of learn. My wife always asks, why do you watch so many live streams? If you're not fishing, you're watching fishing.
Yep.
Even though I don't fish the big rivers and stuff that a lot of guys do, I can still learn stuff by watching them. Get as much knowledge as you can because you will never know it all, and there is no such thing as having too much information.
My wife asked me, why do you watch yours? Mine, not yours. Why do you watch your own? I said, because sometimes when I'm trying to explain things, I have so much going on that I don't want to mislead anybody, so that next time I can be smarter about how I go about approaching a question or talking about something, because there's so many things in catfishing, especially when you input the science into it and you input all of the anecdotal evidence versus all the scientific evidence plus everything else. You can go down the wrong road and it will mislead people. And magazines have that problem. They'll report on things that don't help anglers. They're interesting maybe, but they'll be totally against the whole angling possibility. Like I used to have a couple of editors that would, in the beginning of the year, they'd say, what do you want to write about? And I'd give them a list as long as you're late. There'd be all kinds of things, but they didn't sound as fantastic as maybe catching flatheads off rock shelves, dragging, crankbaits. And I said, look, that happens, but it doesn't happen enough. I'm not doing an article based on fairy tales. I said, fairy tales is something that happens twice a year. I want to write stuff that about stuff that happens every day and will help people. And it's honestly, it's not as fantastic or fantastical. It's not really it's for more of the hardcore guys to read about something that happens every day or a proven pattern that happens in the month of May and June and spell it out when that happens and then how it's going to switch over to July and what you're doing as far as the difference between channel cats and flatheads. I mean, these magazines would love, and they lie to you all the time. They lie to everyone in chat. They lie. I know. I was on the inside. They tried to tell me I was writing articles about certain stuff. I'm like, I'm not doing that. It's a lie. Well, such and such says it. I'm like, it doesn't happen.
A big problem we have too. A lot of these guys that write for these magazines and stuff have zero time on the water. They are not fishermen.
Nope. They're right.
Somebody will tell them something and they'll write it down. They've never tried it. They don't know whether it works or not. And now you're giving this information to thousands of people reading that magazine as a fact. And it could be the farthest thing from the truth.
Yep.
People got to really.
The static started already.
Yeah, we made it quite a while without the static, though.
Yeah, we did. I don't know what happened to my signal. It was great earlier. Now it's terrible.
Yeah, now it quit. The static quit.
Only when you talk. How's that?
Circle hook. Sounds good. Circle hook. When you start off knowing nothing about catfishing at all, it's a start. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, you'd be surprised what you can learn from other anglers if you just be quiet and listen to what they have to say. Keep an open mind, but also don't take everything somebody tells you as gospel.
Right.
You kind of got to weed through uh, what's true and what's fantasy.
Yep.
Yeah, Matt, right there, want to be outdoors. He said, if I don't know, I'll flat out say I don't have a clue.
Me
And
too.
that's the best thing to do, Matt, because if I don't know something, I do not want to give you that false information. I'd
Yep.
rather try and help you get in contact with somebody that has that information, because if I give you that false information, you're going to share that false information with every one of your friends. They're going to share it with their friends. And pretty soon, we got this big story blowed up that has nothing to do with fishing anymore.
One thing, if anybody's watched a lot of my lives, I will tell you if it's a theory or not. If it's a theory and I don't have much proof, before I'll say something is a fact, I'll first give all of the varying circumstances that leads up to what I believe is fact. And then I'll say, that's what I believe is going on. But also, I will say, because of this, and this, I have to have verifiable information to back up my theories. And I'll tell you, well, I can't see under the water, or maybe I can see under the water. Maybe I've dove with those flatheads. Maybe I've had them in tanks, but I will always kind of set that stage. And really, if it's a guess, I'll tell you. I rarely say I don't have any idea. You won't hear me say that very much, because I've generally thought about pretty much everything I can dream up to think about, as far as, what flatheads are doing, or what channel cats are doing, or, what's going on. I mean,
Yeah.
How much the catfish population has benefited since the Clean Water Act of '79, since the PCBs are less prevalent, since the mercury is less prevalent, blah blah blah. I've even thought about the mad tom population, even the stuff in that no one cares about. So yeah, I'm likely to say, yeah, I know a little bit about that. And I know my wife's like, you're the biggest know-it-all I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to be a know-it-all, but gosh, I have thought about all that weird shit.
Yeah. I want to shout out Whisker and Stripes. I think I missed him earlier. He's in here.
So
Epic.
Whiskers,
Another thing a lot of people don't understand is the importance of CPR. The size of a fish has many different variables. People think if you take two 2-pound fish, put them in two different bodies of water, there are factors that are involved where one fish grows at a faster rate than another one does. It's not just based on genetics. It's based on food and stuff. You have a lot of information. Just kind of shout out there on average, let people know how long it takes for that 50-pound fish to reach that 50-pound mark. Everything that comes into play.
I'll talk about 3 different rivers. I'll talk about a medium-sized river, a small river, and a large river, and I'll name them: the Rock River, the Mackinac River, which is a tributary of the Illinois, and then the Mississippi. Now, I've been involved in the actual otolith bone studies on all 3 of those rivers, a combined 3 years back in the late 90s and 2000s. There were and let me talk about the outliers first, because everybody wants to talk about the crazy blue cat that somebody aged, and it was 98 pounds and it's only 12 years old. That's what every DNR guy wants to talk about. And you know why? Because they used to age them on their pectoral fins. Well, the pectoral fins grow like rings on a tree, but they fuse. and you can't tell even in an electron microscope. So you got to go to the inner ear bone, which is called an otolith bone. It's a tiny little thing, and they have to dissect it. And I've looked at thousands, literally thousands of those slides. And an outlier is either a very old small fish or a very old big fish or a very young big fish. So you got the three ranges. There were fish that were only 36 inches long on the Rock River, which is a medium-sized river, and it's got plenty of habitat, plenty of bait fish, plenty of whatever. 36 inches, almost 36 years old. That's a slow-growing fish.
Yeah.
Because the average at about 34 to 36 inches is sexual maturity, which normally on a mid-sized river like that, flatheads hit that in about 7 to 12 years, based on all the studies that I've read. And that doesn't matter if it's a small river or a medium-sized river or a large river. Basically, sexual maturity happens about the same time. Teenage years, which is 7 to 8 years for a fish. Now, there's also been flatheads that were 50 pounds that were considerably older than 50 years old. We're talking 75, 76, 77 years old. Some of the 80-pounders, and there's been very few actually studied because nobody, not even the DNR, doesn't like to kill an 80-pounder. But some of those 80-pounders were probably around 12, and I did the math on this, and it's just an anecdotal thing that I say. Some flatheads that are 80 pounds are old enough that when the first Model T rolled off the assembly line and drove over the bridge, there could be that flathead could have been living underneath that bridge. That's how old these things are. There's been some aged and some 90 years old, but they don't promote those, okay? Because the DNR is a political entity, and the political entity does not want to tell you that these fish are that old, because then all of a sudden everybody starts sounding alarms, and we want to protect the fish and whatever. But let's talk about averages. So you've got, and you said 50. Everybody in the country that I talk to that's a catfish fan, that's usually their number. 50 pounds is their description of a trophy fish, the one that they want, the one that they are after, the one that they think is fairly attainable, desirable, blah, blah, blah. I've had customers for years. They all say that number. What's my chances of catching a 50? And with me on the Mississippi River, it's really pretty good. On the Rock River, with heavy pressure, it was not very good. They have a lot of bank poles and trout lines. There's no commercial fishing on it, but yet out of a 3-year study that I even participated in with a bunch of volunteers from my old Pro Cats organization, out of 3 years on the Rock River, which is a fairly famous river. Everybody's heard about it. If you've read about catfish in magazines, you've heard about the Rock River in Illinois.
Yeah.
The percentage of fish that they collected, and they did net studies in the wintering phase when they were traveling to their wintering holes, which in the lower stretch of the Rock, there's only 3 wintering holes in 50 miles. That's it. They're big wintering holes. I even looked at it with an underwater camera while those nets were in the water, and I counted 3 fish in the entire wintering hole that wasn't in that net. That's it, 3. And they were small. Everything, all the other ones were packed in the net. All right, so, and why I say that is they were seeing the majority of the population on that 30-mile stretch of river. All right, so there's not a bunch of fish that escaped them. It's a mid-sized river. They used a commercial fisherman. They used nets with leads. They all ended up in there. The percentage of fish over 50 pounds, truly over 50 pounds, was 0.0018.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, conversely, on the Mississippi, since it's not a narrow channel river, it's a big wide river with lots of current, lots of this and lots of that. The percentage of fish is greatly bigger, but not by that much. It's only 10% of the population is over 50 pounds. And once you go over 50 to 60, now it drops to 5. And once you go from 60 to 70, now it drops into the 2. And by the time you get to 80, you're about 1%. So flatheads naturally are not a gigantic population of huge fish naturally. But add in commercial fishing, add in fishing pressure, add in, and think of this, the Clean Water Act only got instituted in 1979. Or is it 69? It was 69. Nope, 79. I'll have to look at it again. I'm getting old enough, certain dates kind of evade me. But
Yeah.
So the Clean Water Act, in some rivers, before the Clean Water Act, even bullheads wouldn't live in it. Bullheads only lived for 3 hours in the Chicago River at one time in a cage. A bullhead dead in 3 hours, all of them. Several occasions. So the Clean Water Act, now there's all kinds of fish in the Chicago River and blah, blah, blah. Our waters have gotten lots cleaner. There's no doubt. The heavy metals are down. The mercury's down. Everything's down. But we still have things like PCBs and a list as long as your leg that you shouldn't eat the catfish because, of course, they're top-end predator, blah, blah, blah. You know, all the whole thing in school where, the top-end predator receives everything through the food chain. So let's get back to the very small river. Believe this or not, flatheads grow fairly big in small waters. A lot of people think you got to have a big river to have big flatheads. It is true that big flatheads with the chance to remove themselves from small rivers and get into a bigger river situation will choose the bigger river situation to hang out in. Let's say you've got a main river, Mississippi, you've got the tributary like the Des Moines, and then you've got the Skunk.
Yeah.
Or the Wapsie or whatever comes off the Des Moines. All right. During high water, they'll go off the main river before pre-spawn, go all the way up to Des Moines and end up in one of those tiny tributary rivers, a kayak style river, because they're spawning. But if the water doesn't get high, they stay in the main river or close to the main river. So get this. But if you've got rivers that are dammed, that are tributary rivers, even fairly small rivers with a natural flathead population from the Mississippi River, they'll still get 50 pounds and over. Even if the habitat is not very diverse, we have one of those situations 20 miles from my house. There's 50-pound flatheads in the canal, which is only 20 yards wide, and each lock in the gradient areas isn't even 2 miles long, but yet you'll have natural flatheads that grew to 50 pounds in that lock. And there's barely any current. There's lots of food, but the depth is only 4 foot.
Yep.
And the only reason they don't winter kill is because the locks constantly run and aerate that water, because otherwise they'd winter kill.
Yep.
So that big it's not exactly true that you got to go to big rivers to catch big fish. It's anecdotally true that you do, but it's not specifically true. There are certain situations, but there's also situations where the gene pool has been so sullied, which means the top end fish used to be 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds, but the pressure has been on them so hard that the only genetics left only gets to 25 or 30, and it takes years for it to come back. The Fox River is making a comeback right now because the Fox River up by Chicago, not only is the water quality better, but now they have regulations on them, and they're starting to make a comeback. You never heard of a 40, 50-pound fish 25 years ago, and there was lots of people fishing for them, but lots of people were eating them all. And I don't care what anybody says. If you took every person in my town and you brought them out to my house and you shot everybody that was over 6 foot tall, and then shot everybody that was over 5.5 feet tall, and then shot everybody that was 4 feet or more, what are you going to have left? The genetics are going to propagate smaller until you get the throwbacks, because all genetics all it says is that it's a blueprint for the next generation, right? But there's also latent genes. So you can ruin a population for a period of time, but after a while, it will start to reemerge because of nature's way. Flatheads and blues, they survive and do well the bigger they get. Now, if you limit their habitat, like blues, because they're highly migratory and they need big water, there's a lot of scientific evidence for that. They need big water. they need a lot of space. And there's other catfish around the globe that once we start damming the waters, and that's happened recently, like in the last 40, 50 years, it almost eliminates the really huge fish. So let's think about this. Their blue cat habitat used to be from the Gulf of Mexico all the way darn near into Canada at one time. The rivers used to flood. There was no dams. They had free movement. Free movement. Now it stopped at St. Louis. We cut that river in half.
Yep.
Now they can go through dams because they certainly do. Sorry, it's not St. Louis. It's actually Keokuk, which is another maybe 100 miles. They roam freely through clam style dams. So you got the one that comes from the bottom and then the top, and then they open it up like this. They'll go through that freely. They don't go upriver as well as they go downriver. That's their nature. So they don't push through like when barges are locking through. They need that natural flow. And how do we know that? Because you can go to the pool above Keokuk, try to catch a blue for a month, and you're not going to catch one, even though the habitat's basically the same. But go below Keokuk, where the water falls off the top for 40 feet, and catch all kinds of blues down there. All right, so we know there's no catchable population of blues above Keokuk, Iowa. So we limited their habitat. So no longer are we going to expect to go to a fish market and find a 300 and a 315 pound fish like they did in the 1880s. Okay, so, but blues, even if you put one in a pond, they have a certain, since fish have indeterminate growth, they do. It's just some of them get to that sexual maturity level and they're only, 34 inches instead of getting there quickly. Just like your kids. Yeah. You're not going to have a kid that's 6 foot tall unless he reaches basically 5'10" or 5'11" by the time he's a sophomore in high school. If you got a kid like me that's shaving in 7th grade, well, guess what? He's going to end up being under 6 foot. Sexual maturity equals the outcome of determinate growth creatures. But with fish, there's an extra little thing. It's indeterminate growth, which means they grow their entire life. So they end up getting killed because it takes such a long time. I mean, imagine being a fish and escaping nets for 80 years. And hooks and lines that people are going to kill you, or getting into a death match with another flathead before you can even reach that age, because they do kill each other. Yep, and they eat each other.
Yeah, Dan, I see your comment. I'll definitely explain to you everything, why we're fishing there, what we're fishing there for. I try to explain everything to everybody. There is a method to the madness, and I want you to be able to take what I share with you to other bodies of water and be successful. Our area lakes, like Tim was saying, is about the genetics. Our local lakes were let go for a long time, and I have 4 city lakes all within 30 minutes of my house. And these lakes have been fished so hard, it killed the genetics and it killed the numbers in them. Well, the city officials have started taking note in this because they noticed that their fish are all the same exact size. None were getting any bigger. They were just stuck at a certain size fish. So this year, they started allotting $100,000 a year to bring fish in and stock these lakes to get different genetics and breeding stock in the water to try and bring these lakes back to life. This year, they stocked bass and crappie. Next year, they told me they will restock the catfish. But they split up $100,000, spent $25,000 each on these 4 lakes to bring different fish in to try and help their genetics to grow bigger fish, because they just abused them and let them go for so long that all their fish were the same size. They had the same gene pool. You had the same genes breeding over and over and over again, and there was no progression. So they finally realized this, and now they're starting to take care of them. But it's still going to take years for these lakes to recover from that. You're not going to go out there and next year automatically have 10-pound bass where you only had 1.5 to 2 pound bass.
I have something to add to that, David.
Go ahead.
If you look up, which you can find all this information on the internet, most likely. I read it on actual paper because I was involved with the DNR. And I wanted to know where all of the genetics came from for all the lakes. And I expected that they would get channel cat DNA from local lakes, but that's not the case. Almost every channel cat that's been stocked in a lake in the country is from just 2 places. And one of them is the Red River in Oklahoma, believe that or not, with a top end size of about 15 to 20 pounds. They didn't get them from the Red River in the north, where the top end size is 40 pounds. They got almost no genetics from the North Dakota, Canada area. You know, like you hear the Florida strain, largemouth, that gets way bigger than the northern strain. Well, it's the same thing, only opposite. Except for part of the success of the channel cats from the Red River of the north is they are from big lakes and they're cold. So the colder you keep a fish, and this is going to sound backwards to people, the colder you can keep a fish, the slower his metabolism is, the faster it can grow, and the longer it will live. Everybody says the growing season from the south is so much better than the growing season from the north. This is true. They can gain more weight, but they will burn themselves out and die quicker in hotter water. And there's actually a temperature range at which they lose weight eating as much as they can. Okay. So to grow channel cats and I've had them in my tanks over the winter, weighed and measured them, blah, 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 done all that for years, and fed them as much as you can. A channel cat in 80-degree water or more, you can feed them as much food as they'll possibly eat, and they will lose weight until that water gets down in that 76 and under. Then they do better. They're a colder water fish than blues and flatheads. Flatheads don't do very well at 85 to 90 degrees. Okay. Blues do better at higher temperatures. They also do better at lower temperatures because their range was so big at one time. I believe blues could live in Lake Michigan, and Lake Michigan is relatively cold. Now, I don't think there's any in Lake Michigan because it was attached at one time, but if there was some in Lake Michigan, we'd hear about it. If you know what I mean, people would catch them on accident. So they're not in there. So optimum growth, and a lot of this information doesn't just come from the DNR. It comes from fish farms that did all of the genetic research, and they actually learned that they could increase the meat production by hybridizing channel cats and blue cats. And that doesn't happen naturally very easily, so they have to do it in the laboratory. And they did it in a series, and I don't want to bore everybody, but you got what is called an F1 through an F4. And that means that you have a male channel cat and a female, you have the sperm and you got the eggs of a channel cat, and you put them together with the eggs of a blue. And then you take the offspring from that, which is an F2, and you take a male blue and you put that with that. So it's every other thing till you get all the way to the F4. And the F4 has characteristics more like a channel cat and the aggressiveness of a channel cat, but it has more of the body style like a blue cat. Just some crazy information, I guess. There are some hybrids. There are some hybrids that are around. Now, I don't think they can reproduce though. So have they, and the world record Santee Cooper channel cat looks like an F3 hybrid to me. That is possible that it was natural, but that's just a guess. I have a couple DNR guys that I've talked to about this. They agree with me. I'm too old to be anybody's hero. Thanks.
Well, and people have to understand that too. Know the body waters that you fish. Don't go out there with expectations of catching a 20-pound fish if all you've got is 2 to 3 pound fish. You know, all you're going to do is set yourself up for failure. You're going to be harder on yourself. Uh,
Yep.
and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with guys that have areas and their biggest fish is 5 pounds. Guys, you can get medium action rods and stuff and go out there and catch a 5 pound fish and have the time of your life. They will put the bow in your rod. Uh, get the gear appropriate for the fish you're chasing. Don't go out and try and catch a 40-pound fish on an ultralight rod. Uh, make sure you match the gear for the fish species and the size you're after, and your fishing will be much more enjoyable. Uh, you
Yep.
see a lot of young kids. My wife, for one, you can take her out there on a little light action rod with a cork and worms, and she can catch bluegill from sun up till sundown and have the time of her life. It's not about the size of the fish to her; it's about the action and just the fight. And she has a blast. So, guys, enjoy your fishing. Do what you can to help maximize your fun while fishing. Uh,
My mom was that same way, David. You
my
put her
mother
on the bank. I
out,
mean, oh my
my
God.
mother will go out and drive me nuts. She will sit there and she will sit in the same spot
Oh
and
yeah.
catfish all day
Oh
and
yeah.
not catch nothing. And I'm like, Mom, they're biting down here. Why don't you move? No, no, I just want to sit here. And I'm like, she's one of them, Tim. I've seen her fish with gummy worms. I've seen her spray paint Cheetos and put them on the hook. Like, she will do anything. You want to talk bait? If it has been thought about, that woman has tried it. I was like,
I took my mom in my boat below Shelbyville Dam during the pre-spawn, and she caught a 45-pound flathead, and she said now she can be done. She
yeah,
said she did it. It was great, and she's talked about it ever since. I mean, and that was 20 years ago.
yep. See, my wife has never caught a big catfish before. When we first got together and started fishing, all she would fish with was those little cheap button push reels from Walmart, the
Yep.
little Zebcos. It wasn't even the Zebco 33. It's the bright pink and the bright orange,
Or like a
them little
202
rods, and that's all she would use.
or a
And
404.
I think they're more like a 202. They're little bitty.
Yeah, yeah.
I think 10-pound line's the biggest line you can put on them. And she was out there and she tried to start catfishing with me. And I was like, you cannot catch those catfish on that rod. And, typical woman, she's like, you watch me. And so I let her do it. And these big fish were in the shallow water. And she could actually see them hit the bait. And they were breaking her line off. And she was watching them break her line. And she finally said, okay, what do I need to do? I said, well, first you're going to have to get rid of the rods and them reels because they will not handle that fish. So I finally got her some spinning reels and some good rods, and I got her out in the yard and got her throwing them, got them casting them. And she reels backwards to me. I had to switch all the handles onto the other side because she would turn the spinning reel upside down and try and reel it. And
Oh, yeah.
I got her used to the spinning rods. So now I'm trying to graduate her into the bait casting rods and move her up into them. But that's my ultimate goal. Is I would love to get her on at least a 20-pound catfish. Uh, that would be so exciting for me to watch her reel that in. I would be more excited than she was, and that's my goal.
Well, I decided to move almost right on top of my router, and I don't know if it's going to work or not, but
Mhm.
here we are.
But now
Yeah,
she's
the rabbit's
finally
like
up.
a foot away, and you're
I finally got her upgraded to better rods, a better line, no drag system. Guys, I know a lot of people say, well, it don't matter what rod, what reel you do. If you're chasing monster fish, it does, because you need a reel with a smooth drag. And don't crank your drag down. If your drag is too loose,
right.
you can always tighten it up during the fight. If your drag is too tight, that fish will not give you a second chance. He will pop you off and be gone. And a lot of times, guys,
Back
it's
in
not
the
just
day,
breaking your line.
David, we used to pull drag with our hands because I would never
Yeah,
trust the drag systems because they'd be so bad
that's what I do with
that
mine.
the drag would be going out nice. It would be decent, and then all of a sudden it would tight up. So I started not trusting the drag system, especially with flatheads, especially in tight quarters. And I had some really big fish break me off because even like jeepers, what was it back in the day? Well, it was even 7,000s weren't so great 30 years ago, especially since I couldn't
Yeah,
afford brand new ones. So stuff like that, 6,500s are kind of small. No, I mean, a lot of people say 6,500s they're not too small, but they're channel cat stuff for me, where I fish, because I mean, shoot, I even fish channel cats in really fast current. So, I mean, there's hardly anywhere I fish without fast current because that's what I prefer to fish, honestly.
yeah.
I like that
Uh,
challenge. I'm disappointed in big fish in slow current. Even 50-pound blues, I do just because that's where I'm at in life. So don't anybody start hating on me. But when I catch them above the dam and it's slow current, it's 60 foot of water, and they just drag. I mean, they're still fighters, but they don't fight anything like that super dramatic, epic catfish spot type stuff. I just
yeah.
can't do it.
My favorite spot to catch the big fish is in shallow water. And when I
That
say shallow water, I'm talking 4 foot of water and
2-3
less.
feet.
Because as soon as they
When they're
feel that
splashing
hook set,
around.
yeah, as soon as that hook set, that tail comes up out of the water and they'll slap. And I
That's
mean,
awesome.
in that shallow water, they have so much energy. And I mean, they're off this way, they're off that way, and they're thrashing and rolling. And it gets me going because, uh,
Hey, David, do you
when you
remember when the
set that hook,
Texoma
Texoma,
world record, the 111-pound blue from Texoma in like the early 2000s, or maybe it was even the mid 2000s? Yeah. A guy by the name of Cody Mullenix caught it.
Yes.
He personally told me the story of that 111, and they used surf rods, but they were using tiny shad in the winter, in 4 foot of water, and that's how that fish got named Splash. Because when it set the hook, the rod went down, but before the rod went all the way down, it splashed. And the whole half of the body came up out of the water like this. And he said it was the most incredible thing in the world. Because he caught 30 or 40s before, but this 111-pound monster comes, out of the water like a kraken. He said it was crazy. It was awesome.
Nice. Becca. With the cane pole.
Yep.
Yeah.
My little brother was deadly on them crawdads with a cane pole. Deadly.
Man, I take kids fishing all the time. Not my kids. It'd be anybody's kid. And I had about 4 teenage boys. And then I had 2 smaller kids that were 5 and 3. And I went and got them cane poles. Just cheap cane poles for the little kids. And I tucked them out there with them boys. And I let them boys use my Abu Garcia rods and reels. And I don't let nobody use my rods, but I did these boys. Those little fish were up there, the little perks were up in the grass. And the younger kids got tired of fishing. So they put their cane poles down and they were done. And them teenage boys got them cane poles and they had more fun. They just threw my Abu Garcia and stuff on the ground. They had more fun catching on them cane poles than they did with them Abu Garcias. So,
Well, David, I still have a cane pole, and I love to catch bait with a cane pole, especially at the canals.
yeah,
If I have a chance before the itch weed gets 6 foot high, when it's still down, I can walk along that canal without getting chiggers. I do enjoy about a 14-foot cane pole. I fished a sunken work barge last weekend, and I tightened my drag down. I knew if I caught anything, I would have to horse it out of that mess on the deck. Nice. I'm telling you. I think I texted that to you, David. What percentage of my fish over between 75 and 100 pounds have come from sunken ships? And they say probably right around 25% of them.
yeah. Well, see, and a lot of people won't. They don't target stuff like that. Bridges.
Sunken ships are kind of scary.
Yeah, the bridges, the old bridges that are collapsed and down, sunken ships, even in your local lakes, the sunken boats and stuff that are out there. Anything like that changes the contour and it gives cover in that water.
Yeah.
And people overlook this stuff. The biggest thing it gets me a lot of times, guys are so afraid of losing tackle that they will not fish certain areas the way they need to. And, you got to be willing to sacrifice some tackle sometimes to get that big fish.
I know fully well how much tackle I've got. There's a tree at the bottom of the Rock River where it goes into the Illinois River. The Mississippi, that I fished for 3 years straight. And there's a big, massive tree in there that if you could see it, I guarantee it looked like a Christmas tree with my red hooks on it.
Yeah.
But I caught a lot of big fish before that current changed in there. Now I go into it and I catch 25s and 30s, but I don't catch 60s, 70s, and 80s in there anymore because it changed just enough. I mean, it's still in the same pool, still in the same spot. And there have been places that I used to catch smaller ones. The current changes it just enough. It attracts bigger ones now. Then the opposite has happened. It used to have big ones. Now it has smaller ones. And that is something that not a lot of people know because they haven't fished the same spots year after year, time after time. And to know that and to be able to report on that is pretty incredible because when making your milk run, if you're interested in big fish only, you know that you can literally cross a spot off as max 30 pounds, max 20 pounds, max 15 pounds. You can also add spots that are mostly fish over 40 pounds, 40 to 80, 90, 100 pounds. Pretty crazy, but it is possible. But very few of those spots in a pool exist. In some pools, none at all. I fished a lot of different pools that don't really have a situation where I could try to target a fish over 80 pounds.
Yeah.
It's going to be poke and hope at best, and it might take because it's too subtle. It's too deep. It's too this. It's too that, or it's not enough this or not enough that. The Canton pool is one of them. The Keokuk pool, I can target big fish, but the Canton pool, which is much deeper, but it's much slower. That's right.
That's exactly right, Brandon.
Catfish and Dreams.
That's exactly
yes,
right.
And no, there are areas where you don't lose any tackle that hold big fish, but that is the brief windows of time that they're there. Basin holes for flatheads when they're coming out of their wintering holes sometimes don't have much cover at all. I've caught the most flatheads on a single anchor was like 24 flatheads, and there wasn't a single piece of cover there. But it was May in my zone, and they were basically just waking up from their winter slumber, and I wasn't on them. I was anchored using fresh moon eye, and man, we just tore up on the flatheads for like 2 days in a row. then there was a short window of time the next day. And then as soon as they were basically fully woken up and out of their wintering holes, you only catch one or two. But I caught them just right a couple of times. There's also spots where there is cover there and you're focusing on cover, and you can throw off to the right where there's no cover, maybe just a current seam or maybe just a ledge, and they're all for some reason out of the cover and waiting for bait fish. So it's not, remember, there's no absolutes in fishing, but he's right. If you're not willing to risk your rigs, if you're not willing to risk your rigs, there are days when you're going to blank when you could have caught 4 or 5 fish, or 6 or 7, or 8 or 9, or 10 or 11. Because I've seen it where they're all in the wood and you got to go in after them, and yeah, you're losing a lot of expensive crap. But it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
And remember, guys, I fished a lot of different rivers, but I don't have years and years on everyone else's rivers. Things are different, but catfish are usually the same.
Yeah.
Generally the same, no matter where they're at. So you may need to target flatheads differently on the Tennessee, because I even see that in everybody else's videos in their lives. They can catch flatheads in 40 foot of water on a crappie head that's 2 days old.
Yeah.
Well, you're not doing that where I live. Not very often. You're not doing it with any sort of success. And you're not going to take a kayak, and I'm not making fun of them. You're not going to row a kayak out to a main ledge in front of a creek mouth and go catch a bunch of blues and maybe catch a whole bunch of flatheads. Yes, Donald Weir. Matter of fact, I fished Dead Man's Hole. I also fished the Dragon Tail. I also fished several wing dikes below the Des Moines. And I also go down and fish the monster under. It's really hard to describe. I can tell you what I call it. I just call it the monster wing dike, but it goes all the way across and it's deep. But the Boils at Keokuk, and that's where the power plant water comes out. It's actually all shallow there, full of channel cats. You got to get into those pockets for blues and flatheads. And really, it's not worth my time much when I have so much better opportunity downriver. I will fish it if I have to. If they drop the water and I still need to go to current, I'll go fish Dead Man's Hole, which is about 30, 35 foot deep. It's got a concrete wall and a big swirling whatever. But it's called Dead Man's Hole for a reason, because if you fall in, you're pretty much done. So, the Dragon Tail, I want to fish that just to make a video out of it. I don't normally fish it, but it is a wall of water that comes from 40 feet in one spout, and it does these gigantic 15 to 20 foot swells. Okay, that's going to depend, Whiskers. So your question was, in my opinion, when is the best time of year to fish right below dams? Pre-spawn for flatheads is one of the best times in central part of the country, is actually 2 weeks before July 4th. So you've got that upstream migration of flatheads, and they start to traffic jam below dams with adequate habitat. Not all dams are created equal, but some of them have the right pockets of the right water, especially along the bottom, where you can go in there and just put a whooping on numbers and big flatheads. Now, if you're going to fish for blues, most of the time they're not pushed up in high water, especially in June, July. I don't normally fish dams for blues until about August, but that's up here in the northern reaches. Okay, so Creole is catching big fish below dams all the time down there, but we have a transient population. Okay, it moves up, it moves down, moves up, moves down, and blues will migrate several hundred miles in just a few weeks. We know that from telemetry studies. But also, my successes below dams is going to depend on what that water's been doing for the 3 to 4 days before I get there. So I'm going to look on the internet. I'm going to look on, what that water level graph is and what it's predicted to be. So if it's rising hard, I know fish dams. If it's stable, I'll fish a dam. If it's dropping, I'll skip the dam usually. Unless I have no other choice, then I'll go up to the fastest water I can, even if it's dropping, because it's the water downstream that drops. They'll slow it up. Usually there's enough current to deal with it. And it just depends. I actually prefer to fish down river when I can. It's more tranquil. It's more picturesque. It's not beating you up. It's not tossing you left and right. You know, I really like fishing below, but sometimes there's no point in it because there's no bite down there. And the one thing I don't like about fishing dams is when that bite's on, it's usually not really on everywhere else. So a lot of times I have no choice. Some of the biggest fish I've ever caught is when the water is, I'm not saying dead, but there's not hardly any current going on downriver. So the upriver, the farthest north point that I could get to with that fast water, actually ended up equaling 100-pound fish.
Hey, Jeremy, welcome. You know, a lot of people don't understand, you know, different areas hit different parts of the catfish prime.
Yep, they do. They do.
Spawn. Fish will be spawning in one area when they're not spawning in another.
That's right. And we talked earlier that some places like mine have a long or a usually longer pre-spawn period, 4 to 6 weeks. Yours, most of the time, is only about 2.
Yeah.
Down there, Texas, Oklahoma, stuff like that. Tennessee may only last 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. It gets warm so fast.
Yep.
And that water temperature comes up. Yep. And a lot of people don't know this, but not all catfish spawn at the same time.
That's true. That's true.
You know, usually your flatheads are the first ones to pull off and spawn because they'll spawn in
channel cats.
The flatheads down here, they'll spawn at 65 degrees. Your channel cats and your blues, a lot of times they like to spawn at 70 to 85 and water temp.
Okay, so and that may make a lot of sense because our weather is so volatile here.
Yeah,
that they go more by the length of daylight than they do the water temperature because they cannot afford to be slow on the spawn. They've got because our channel cats make their upstream, you know, their progression towards their spawning areas in April, and they don't spawn until basically June 1.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's 6 weeks of that pre-spawn thing, and that water is still only 40-some degrees in April. 48, 47 degrees, almost consistently. But you'll have warmer years where it will exacerbate. It'll be quicker, but they'll still wait until that daylight is about right. Now, flatheads, where I'm at, are almost like clockwork. The weekend before July 4th, as far as the actual egg laying, big deal. It'll be all pre-spawn before that from about May 20. See, we're not even into flathead pre-spawn here.
Yeah.
They're barely, I mean, this is May. They're barely becoming catchable on a regular basis.
See, you haven't even started your pre-spawn yet, and my pre-spawn is already shut down.
Yeah. And every degree of longitude, you are approximately 2 degrees longitude. It's 2 weeks for every degree, north to the south from where I am located. And I calculated that 20 years ago while talking to people on the internet. So similar to this, you and I are talking. I used to talk to guys in Canada. I used to talk to guys in Minnesota. I used to talk to guys in Texas, Tennessee, and all that stuff. So I could figure out when the spawn was. Now, you cannot just listen to the average weekend catfisherman to know when the spawn is. You got to talk to somebody that, I mean, they fish all the time. And once you find those guys, they'll start telling you, you know, okay, my channel cats, that they're not deep in the river now. They're up the tributaries. They're, you know, they're packed below these dams. They're on wood. See, like our fish they're not even setting up on wood yet. They're still in the deeper waters because it's not that warm. It's clear water. And once you see my video, you're going to see what I'm talking about. Because, I mean, we set up on all kinds of awesome wood that's going to be great next weekend. But 2 weeks ago, no go.
Yeah.
No
see,
wood.
our fish pulled up into the shallow water and stuff before Easter.
Yeah, ours don't even move out of our wintering holes until April 15th.
Yeah.
They're still
Yeah,
winter.
It warms up so quick here that we had such an early movement. And, man, I was catching them in shallow water, and people could not believe that I was catching them in that shallow water. I was like, it's the time of year, it's a water temperature, it's warming up. These backwater coves, the main channel, you could get close to that main channel and find that shallow water in them little creeks and the coves, and the fish were in there faster because they had less distance to travel in the
Actually,
water.
I'm a little ashamed to say this, but the best people to talk to about when the actual spawn is are noodlers.
Yep.
They are, because those noodlers, they know when those fish are nested up. They know when
Yep.
they've got eggs. They know when they've got fry. They know that they're not there, and then all of a sudden they show up. So talking to noodlers will actually tell you exactly when those are. But I can say one thing for sure. In my neck of the woods, the weekend of July 4th, before that, you'll have hardly any flatheads packed in the rocks below lowhead dams, like big lowhead dams, like on the rock or whatever. And I used to wade up into my neck into these things all the time, fish all night, all day, you know, holding my rods above my head like that when I was in my 20s. And the success rate was minimal at best until that weekend right before July 4th, all the way up to July 4th. And then it's hot. And then right after July 4th, it goes to nothing because they're all, I mean, the population is split. The whole month of July here in Illinois sucks. I'm telling you, the population split. The females go deep and they go to slow water. They don't even care. I'll catch females when they're coming up right before, you know, right at the height of the pre-spawn, and they're the big beastie, big, you know, big around like that. But they're very docile. The males are aggressive, longer, skinnier, plenty of bite marks. They're all ragged warriors. But the females, they're perfect. They look great until the point at which the males start biting them. And the females will be bit on the pectoral fins. They'll be bit on the tail section, almost never in the face like the males are. They bite each other in the face and all that stuff. The bite marks that happen is because the females are letting off pheromones and the males are attracted and excited about it. And they're trying to get them to get excited about how aggressive they are. So they start attacking them and they don't know how big or small they are. They start out thinking they're big. Okay. They have to prove it to each other. They can't size each other up. The only way a big female knows that she wants to lay eggs and be successful with a big, really robust male is that he owns the castle. He owns the best cover. He owns the best depth. He owns this. And he's aggressive. And he's big enough to shove her around, and she's big. So that's how they decide. And really, a lot of females, they don't really have a choice. It's basically just, you ever seen how aggressive dolphins are when they spawn?
No.
Okay, dolphins will gang up on females and force her into spawning. It's almost the same way with flatheads. Flatheads, and okay, so I can't see flatheads, but I've talked to enough people. I've seen it with my own eyes enough. I've witnessed what's going on with the fish, and I've extrapolated some of this information from fish that we can see that act very similar to flatheads. They have the same type of habitats. They have the same, even some ocean fish. But here I am going all catfish nerdy on you, but literally there will be more than one male at the time when they're ready to lay their eggs that are trying to mate with this female. Now, most of the time, if the male's big enough, he can hold that zone and protect that area so that there's no males that try to actually kind of move in on his territory. Okay. So that's why they fight so much. And I've had 40-pound males that were literally in the mouth all the way up to their dorsal fin, because I can see the tooth pad marks on top of their head right here. And the tooth pads are like this big on each one, and they're exactly spaced apart. They got a bite mark underneath, they got a bite mark on top, And when they do that, and I've seen it with my own eyes, they have suction. It's not that they have a lot of pressure. They suck onto it, and their little grinding pads and all that stuff, and they work them back and forth until it starts biting into the skin. Okay? But flatheads, that's one thing about flatheads. They have the best healing out of all three catfish. Their wounds will heal in a matter of days. So when you see one with a big giant bruise, that might only be 2 days, 3 days old. You know, like I sent you that picture of that one with that monster bruise on it. It's like a mouth like this big. It had half of that 80-pound fish from its dorsal fin all the way down to its belly in its mouth like this and sucked onto it. Now, but the females will have a lot of tail marks, and everybody thinks it's because it's spawning, you know, like they're rubbing on stuff and all that.
Yeah.
It's not from that. It's not from that. It's from other males. It's from males. They attack their tails. And that's I don't have 100% proof, but I'm about 99%. But that's
I've actually seen them. I've actually seen them in the creeks when they're flooded and the fish are coming up and stuff. You'll see, I've seen them where they've had that one fish in their mouth and they're just sitting there swimming backwards and dragging that fish.
Yeah. Now some of that could be, since they don't know how big they are, mistaken predation because they can't size up their prey very good. Everybody's heard of, you know, the flathead that has the blue in its mouth that's basically the same size and they get stuck and die. Everybody knows that. Flatheads have eaten soccer balls, got them stuck in their mouth. They've eaten oil cans and all kinds of crazy stuff. But a flathead, and I've had them in my tanks long enough. I mean, big flatheads, not just little 5-pounders. I've had those too, but I've had them up to 30 pounds. And some of them are so aggressive. It's crazy. You introduce another fish, could be the same size, and they will fight all night, all day, till one of them's dead because they just don't allow it. And then there's other ones, females, they don't care. They'll be right up next to another one. You can put 2 females, you know, and they'll squabble a little bit. You get that one wrong male, and you introduce anything. Doesn't matter. Bullheads, another channel, you know, a big channel cat. I have a 6-pound flathead kill an 8-pound albino channel cat in one night. Skinned him alive.
Didn't want him in his territory.
Nope. And he when he was by himself, he would never get up and move around during the day. But as soon as I put the channel cat in there, he would get up and purposely, on purpose, go over there and attack the crap. I mean, it was ferocious.
Yeah.
For a little 6-pound flathead.
Yeah. Well, guys, I hate to get it to an end, but we've been on for about 2.5 hours. Doesn't seem like that long.
I drank a Red Bull and got all excited about talking about catfish. So.
I do too. I don't even do the Red Bull. When I talk about fishing, I'm very passionate about it. I enjoy it so much. Being able to share with people and help them means a lot to me. It kind of gives you a sense of accomplishment. Because like I say, most of the stuff that me and you have learned, Tim, we have learned through hard knocks. It has been the hard way. And now we're able to come in and share that information with people and try and help them not go through the same kind of tribulations that we went through. Basically, there was no information sharing. I didn't have anybody that taught me. My mother was a single parent, you know, and there was 4 of us kids. I got into fishing and hunting instead of running around like the others did. So I basically had to teach myself, and it was kind of trial by fire, you know, trial by fire. You make a lot of mistakes, but you learn a lot. And
see, David, I did all that stuff. I did the football, the drinking, the fighting, the girls, the fishing, all of that stuff. My brother and sister are lucky because I paved the road for them.
Yeah,
they had it easy.
Well, that's like when my kids were growing up. You know, I knew everything they were doing because I had already tried it.
That's right.
You know, you're not going to get one over on me. And it's funny now because now I got grandkids, and my grandkids are trying to do this stuff to their parents. And he's like, "What am I gonna do?" I said, "My wife's favorite saying is, I survived you, you will survive them." And
See,
it,
I'm lucky. I got 2 boys that are strapping young lads, but I have friends that I went to high school with that come over quite often. You know, they always come and visit, blah, blah, blah. And they
yeah,
have told my son stories, and they say, do not mess with your dad because he
yeah,
will not put up with that. Because at one time they're starting to think, oh, they're pretty, they're pretty big, pretty strapping, whatever. And I said, I don't want to have to deal with that. I said,
yeah.
I already taught you what you're supposed to be when you were 10. So let's not get dumb now.
My son, when he got, I don't know, probably about 16, he hit about 6'2", and he got to thinking, he was pretty big, and he got out there and tried to wrestle with me, and man, I could still pick him up in one arm and throw him over my shoulder and wool him around and stuff. And,
See, I can't. My oldest one, he's built like a freaking NFL football player. He's not quite as big. He's bigger than I am. But
yeah,
that kid, he'll twist your head off. So
yeah,
luckily, he's a good enough kid. He has never challenged me like that. Thank God.
yeah.
And the youngest one, he's a parent. He I don't have to worry about him at all. They
Well,
got
I
enough
appreciate you
mother
coming in.
What's that?
I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate you coming in. If you want to stay, we can talk after the stream, but I'm going to go ahead and end it and let these guys go. Guys, I appreciate all y'all, and we'll try and get Epic back on here again. Get more information. I know there's no way you can fit it all into one night.
I'll have
talking with Epic is like a trip to Six Flags. You just can't get it all in one night. So I appreciate everybody, and we'll catch y'all on the next one.
All righty.